indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let the record show all selectmen are present. Welcome, Mr. Elias. Thank you. I'd like to welcome the advisory board members and anybody in the public who's here. Consent agenda, warrants number 33 dated 2/10/20, number 34 dated 2/24/20, payroll register number 7 dated 2/13/20.
Move consent. Second.
Motion and a second to accept the consent agenda, the warrants and payroll register as read. Any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? All in favor, the motion carries. Acceptance of the meeting minutes of February 10th, 2020.
Sorry.
The motion and a second to accept the meeting minutes of February 10th, 2020. All those in favor? All in favor, except Mr. Elias, you'll abstain. Old business, Mr. Moody,
None for me, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Elias,
Obviously none for me.
Mr. Savage, Mr. Duchamp.
None for me.
All right, items of communication, Mr. Town Manager.
Just a couple of things. We'll talk a little bit about this during the budget considerations. Madison Paper's attorney, John Block, has asked for oral arguments before the judge in Skowhegan. I consulted with our attorney, Dave Silk, and Dave responded to the judge saying, you decide what you want to do. The town of Madison is fine just for you to make a decision based on the information that's in front of you. Obviously, a day of oral arguments would be very expensive to the taxpayers of Madison, so we're trying to avoid that. Right now, all the information is before Justice Mullen in Skowhegan, so that's the latest we have on that information with MPI and their appeal. In your packets, I had given you some information in regards to a plan that was submitted by DOT for the Ward Hill Old County Road 148 intersection. Basically, they have some money that they can do some different signage there, and I've kind of turned that over to the road commissioner and let Jeff kind of talk with them about whatever they want to do at that intersection. I don't think they're gonna go as far as a flashing light at the intersection, but there are some more signage things that the state can do. I put in your packets is a project with the school called Creating a Portrait of a Student going on in March. The superintendent has asked me to work on that with her, and I'll be glad to help with lots of other people, I'm sure. This Wednesday at MEW, if anybody's interested, Senator Brad Farron is going to be meeting up at MEW with a group, and they're going to hear from Jeff Perry, who owns New England Battery Storage. He's the gentleman that's building, they built 4 storage units in Madison, 3 at Jones Street, 1 up at the business park, to kind of capture some of the energy. And basically, for the town of Madison, it results in some taxable value. But he's going to talk a little bit more about that. And so members of the MEW board are going to be there, and they've extended an invitation to the selectmen if anybody wants to go. That's 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning. And the day after tomorrow, yep. And the only other thing is just a reminder that not tomorrow, but the next Tuesday, March 3rd, is Super Tuesday, and Maine participates in the presidential primaries. So we'll have election day at the town office. That's all I have.
And a referendum.
And a referendum. Thank you, Ward.
All right, new business. Number 1, discuss first draft of the 2021 municipal budget.
All right, I'd like to thank the members of the advisory board that can come out tonight. I made copies. It looks like they've all been used up over there on the sides. I'm going to try to put whatever I had over there in big print also up on the screen as we go through a couple of things. First off, I just want to remind all the members of the Budget Advisory Committee, April 1st, Wednesday at 5:30 is the meeting where the votes are taken and the budget is proposed to go to town meetings. So that's Wednesday, the 1st of April, 5:30. April Fools, so hopefully we'll keep it as serious as possible. So if you have not been seen and sworn in by Kathy prior to that, please make your way to the town office and make sure you're sworn in. Budget Advisory Board members are 1-year appointments, so even if you got sworn in last year, you'll probably need to be sworn in again this year. So just keep that in mind. If I could borrow this for just a second. I just want to make reference to some of these I kept printing and they just kept coming out bigger. This is the capital improvement plan. We won't go over this in detail tonight, but I want as many people to have it as possible. Many people have asked me if we have a capital improvement plan, and we do. I work on this with the department heads, and we put it together. And there are categories there for highway, town property, recreation, fire, miscellaneous, and so forth. Now, just a word about these totals, because if you total them all down, you'll see 700,000, 600,000, 500,000. So that might freak you out a little bit, right? These totals are based on income that we have from raising taxation. Also income that we have through the TIF accounts. Also income that we get through certain grants. So there's a multitude of revenues that go into creating this capital plan. Now this is also, in the spreadsheet, it has references to other pages. There's a whole page of highway equipment that as it's replaced, we cross off the ones that are no longer with us and we take the new ones and move them to the bottom. Same with fire equipment. And there's a 5-year paving plan that's not reflected here, but it's again part of this spreadsheet. So if you ever have any questions about the 5-year paving plan the road commissioner puts together, we have all that. I just share this with you in case you are talking with people in the public who think that we don't know what we're doing, and you can tell them that maybe we might know a little bit. So I appreciate it. Does anybody have any questions on the capital improvement plan? The other thing I want to point out is this sheet here, which is a little bit less big. This is the year-over-year comparison that goes all the way back to 2014. And so the reason I like to show this is it breaks down pretty much category by category, department by department. And you can look back and see what we were spending in 2014, 2015, otherwise known as the Madison paper days. Because you will see a significant decline, and then over the last couple of years you'll see a steady building back up. And that's happened in the departments like the fire department, like the library, like the highway department. But I'm pleased to say that even the proposed budget we're looking at offering this year is still less than the budget from back in 2014 and 2015. So again, that's for your reference. Any questions about that sheet? All right. Seeing none, I just want to touch on a couple of budget considerations for this year. And again, this was in the packet that went out via email. We've made some adjustments to it. So let's update the Madison paper appeal. The State Board of Property Tax Review ruled in the town's favor in April of 2019, but they did not release their written decision until August/September. So Madison paper had to wait. They could not file an appeal until that written decision was out. So that happened in September, late September, early October. Madison paper filed an appeal. So now that goes to Somerset Court in Skowhegan, and to, as you can see there, Justice Mullen. He has all the briefs, he has all the paperwork. He's asked if attorneys want to make oral arguments. Madison paper says yes. So far the town has said no, and that's what we're awaiting. If Justice Mullins upholds the state board's findings, in other words, if he rules in the town's favor, it is likely that MPI will appeal to the state Supreme Court. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Right now there's not a whole lot of work for our lawyer to do, so it doesn't cost us a whole lot of money before the Somerset Court, because that justice is only looking at what the state board did. He's not weighing in on whether the valuation should have been 70 million or 20 million. He's saying, did the state board make any mistakes when they made their decision back in April? So if he rules in our favor and says, I don't see that the state board did anything wrong, which everybody that I talk to seems to think that would be very likely, then if MPI wants to, they appeal to the state Supreme Court. Then that reverts back to our arguments that the town was justified in $72 million back in 2016, and MPI would have to fight this whole thing all over again. My guess is if the justice Mullen upholds the state and the town, then you'll hear from MPI another cash offer that says, we'll go away if you pay us this much money. That's what I anticipate. So, right now, we're just kind of holding, waiting on a decision by the local Skowhegan, Somerset County Justice. Any questions on that?
Just to fill in the loop for the people that are here that don't know this, after they lost in the state court, they sent us a letter saying, hey, if you don't want us to appeal this, you can give us this much money and we'll go away. Just so that you know that.
Yeah, so that's why we expect them to do it again. Their last offer was $350,000. So all we have to do is pay them $350,000 and they'll go away. So, obviously, the board said no.
Yeah, me too. You ain't getting 50. $50, I'm gone. 50,000, Jack.
Oh, jeez. So the budget you're getting a first look at tonight, the first draft, is about 2%, about a 2% increase in the non-capital budget. And most of that is composed of wage and benefit increases. We are really starting to see the impact of minimum wage, and we're starting to see the impact of different agencies not even putting postings out for jobs. They're simply knocking on doors of other agencies and offering their people more money. I talked to another town right up the road from us, and they had an administrative person that went to work for a private company. They hired a new person, trained them, they were doing great, and another town, a little bit to the west of them, basically hired her for $2 an hour more. And so they just moved from one place to the other. So we, in our budget preparations for this year, took a look at making some adjustments in some of our pay scale, particularly due to the impact of minimum wage, and to make sure that we were trying to be as competitive as possible. The highway contract is signed. It's now set through 2023. The current contract expires in June 30th of this year, so now we're contracted through the next 3 years. And that was a 3% wage increase for the coming year, the following year, and a 2.75% increase for the third year of that contract. As such, in this budget, we have recommended other personnel across the board for a 3% wage increase. There's also a small, in health insurance standards, a small 3% increase in costs in regards to health insurance. Now, Tammy and I have kind of gone back and forth on this additional pay period. It was questioned by some members of the advisory board, and I knew they would, and I'm thankful that they did. Because of leap year, we have 53 Thursdays in this budget cycle. So initially, we had thought, well, let's put in that extra week. But then, now we're considering, can't we just, what do you call it, set aside money? Can't think of the accounting term. You're not gonna help me, are you, Tammy? Because you and I disagree on this.
Yeah.
Accrual, thank you, Patrick. So, the budget that you have now, this paperwork, we've removed that additional pay period. And one of the things I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna defer to our auditors and to see if the auditors are going to expect an accounting of 53. And you're smiling like you've already asked them, so you know the answer to that question. So, so that's $12,000 that will, may be coming back into the budget if the auditors agree that due to the 53 pay periods this year, we should budget for that. So those are the things that have impacted our budget.
So what? 53 pay periods for whom?
For everybody that gets paid through payroll.
Salary?
Everybody gets paid through payroll, right?
Everybody's on payroll, on a weekly payroll.
So your salary is X amount per year, $100,000 say.
That would be fantastic.
No, right, let's just say for
Oh,
example.
you're not talking about me, okay.
I don't care if you get that in one check or 53 checks, that's how it should be done. Not an extra pay.
So,
Well, the idea is you have people who are working per hour, right? You have to put that
I'm not talking about hourly, I said salary.
But there's only 2 people that are paid salary.
So that person shouldn't get an extra pay period. Your pay is July.
I understand
1,
what you're
30.
saying.
If it's 20 pay periods or 50 pay periods, it doesn't
Right.
matter.
So the last Thursday in that 53 Thursdays is actually the 31st of December.
Well, it'll be a fiscal year, so it'll be the first Thursday in July, actually.
Okay, so it runs
Right.
fiscal year. So can't you set your calendar based on your pay periods for your pay schedule? So that way, that last day falls into the new calendar year,
Right.
you know?
And
I've seen it happen that way before.
this just came up today. It's one of the reasons I didn't cross it out completely, I just lined through it. It might be back. So, it may be back into the budget to plan for that in that regard. The other thing I wanted to touch on briefly, last year, part of the contentious vote was the water treatment assessment fee. If you remember at town meeting and here at the advisory board, a figure was set at $44,000, even though the sanitary district issued us a bill for $107,000. To date, we have not paid that bill for $107,000, and we have set up that $44,000 to pay any bills that were accrued by the sanitary district for the town of Madison. And we did pay about $12,000 out of that account, so we still have a balance of over $30,000 of that 44 that's been unused to date. I spoke with Dale Clark at the sanitary district today. Due to a variety of reasons, they still have not finished their budget discussions as a board. And so he had nothing to say or nothing to add about that. So since we have some increases in other aspects of the budget, I'm recommending that we decrease that line from 44,000 down to 25,000. That should cover any of the storm drain cleaning costs, but it doesn't directly address this stormwater assessment fee. And the last time I think we spoke about it at a meeting here, it was Mr. Elias's impression that they were gonna wait and see how things worked out in Anson before they even sent the bill.
Exactly right. So are you gonna carry over the 30?
I'm gonna recommend that when we get to the end of the budget year, yeah. Any other questions on that? You might see in some of these budget lines that the water district fee has gone up. I talked with Mike Corson. Mike came to a selectmen's meeting a few months ago and talked about the project that they're doing to reline the pipe that runs from the pond to their treatment plant, I think that's right. And the costs associated with that, they got a grant and a loan from USDA, but he anticipates that at the beginning of their next fiscal year, so January 21, they're gonna issue a 10% increase on water rates. That will swell their budget a little bit, and then whether you care to understand or not, the state allows them to charge 30% of their budget as a fire protection fee. So right now, that's about $225,000 a year. After Mike and I talked, we probably ought to expect to bump it to $235,000 for this year, possibly $245,000 for the following year.
Tim, that's changed. As of Thursday, it's gonna be 3% starting July 1st.
3% starting July 1st this year.
Yes.
So when will your budget be? Because your budget starts January, right?
Correct.
Okay.
But the new rate increase will start 3%.
So
July 2020.
So the rate increase doesn't necessarily affect our fire protection. It's what your overall budget ends up being for 2021.
I believe your fire protection will go up 3%.
Now, I fell into that trap last time. It doesn't work that way.
All I know is the next 3 years, it's gonna go up 3%
3% a year,
every year.
every year.
Yes.
And thank you for this, but starting July every year or January? Is it gonna go up again January?
No,
So it's gonna go July to July to July,
correct.
3%? Okay. then I'll talk with Mike again and just see what that impacts the budget for.
That was a vote last Thursday.
Thank you. That's helpful. For the sake of everyone's time and sanity, I don't necessarily recommend that we go through the budget line by line unless members of the Budget Advisory Committee have specific questions or members of the board have specific questions. We certainly can. You have the latest information there before you. So
It's on April first, right, not tonight.
April 1st, we will go
Yeah,
through
no.
category by category.
No, I don't, no, let's just give an overview.
Okay, so the overview is basically this. The non-capital budget will come in at about 2% of an increase over the previous year. So the question is going to be, as always, what are we looking at for capital? We have been spending more on capital to catch up on equipment and roads that we have kind of let go over the last 5 years. So that's what's on the next couple of slides here. So your capital this year is going to be made up of paving, highway equipment, fire equipment, and a capital project for the library roof. So the first thing is looking at the proposed roads. We're always, we're brave enough to share road names with you folks, but we don't often share road names at town meeting because things may change, and we don't want to promise and not be able to deliver. But this is the plan based on the road commissioners' work through the road surface management program. If you remember, we did the first mile of Schuster Road last year. This would finish it. Walker Road, which is right at the end of Schuster Road on the other side of Preble Avenue to the Northwalk line. Father Rawl Road, although it's not very heavily traveled, it needs a lot of work. Golf Course Road is on there as a recommendation for a chip seal, which means we would not, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff, but we would not put hot mix on it. We would simply put chip seal over the existing pavement.
That's correct. That road was overlaid in 2014. It was crack sealed some before last, and that's a good opportunity to use the chip seal with no fresh pavement.
Okay.
So Schuster, Walker, Otherall, and Perkins are all hot top.
They are.
The only things that aren't mentioned on here, because we're talking about raising from taxation this money, there is still projects underway on River Road. If you've been on River Road, you've noticed a different placement of poles. So we're working to get those lines transferred over so that the work can be done to move the road over a little bit away from the embankment that goes down to the river. And then we would like to finish paving all the way from the gravel pit all the way to the Solon line. So right now, that has been put in the TIF budget. Some of you may be aware that Golf Course Road is considered a TIF road. However, we left it in this category because that River Road project will eat up all we've got for cash on hand this year. So any questions about road paving and questions or comments in that regard? I'm losing my voice here, so somebody else is going to talk. Highway spending. Last year, if you recall, voters set aside $100,000 for a loader. Jeff and I talked about this, and Jeff's going to notice right away that I've scaled back some of his estimates. That's because I've included some of the money for perhaps a trade-in value, and set aside some of the carry forward that you'll most likely have in your equipment line from savings that you incurred by getting a snow blower at a lower price than what was approved. So these numbers have already been ratcheted down a little bit. $80,000 will get the highway to where they need for a new loader. We've been talking the last couple of years about replacing both the skid steer and the sidewalk plow, known as the trackless. Last year, when we were having these discussions, we were talking about replacing each of those individually, getting a new skid steer and a new trackless type. The Highway Department have found a newer unit that will do both, so we can essentially replace two pieces of equipment with one. And it has all the necessary attachments to do both of the things that those two pieces of equipment did. And that cost is there at $70,000. Jeff is also recommending, and I agree, to start putting aside for a truck. We were fortunate to buy the last truck for about $180,000,
Yeah, just a little under.
somewhere in that neighborhood. So that's his recommendation on highway equipment. Any questions on that? I will say that we've been able to tick off a lot of the very old equipment from the highway department. And if this goes through, I believe it technically kind of gets the town caught up. Although, by saying that, we still need to continue to set aside money for equipment purchases every year. I think the next slide is fire and library. Last year, we set aside $45,000 for a replacement tanker truck. Don is recommending another $50,000. Last year, we started putting money aside for replacement SCBA's. Those are the air tanks that the firefighters take in. So we put another $5,000 in there for this year. So the tanker truck we have right now is a 1990, leaks a little bit. Don does the best they can to keep it going. It is a manual transmission with true miles unknown, as we say in the car business, because the odometer you can't read. Because it's a manual transmission, and in the world we live in today, there are only a few people that can drive it. So a new replacement is going to be $330 to $360. Last year we applied for a FEMA grant, assistance to firefighters. What I was told from our application was we scored well, but there were older trucks, and so the money that was out there went to trucks that were 34, 35 years old. Ours is now 30 years old, so we're going to try again. The application goes in next week. And I've told Don we'll continue this pattern of putting in for these grants and recommending at town meeting we set aside a little bit of money for it. And the library, Julia has been talking with me about a new roof. She's went out and got some estimates. Interestingly enough, we have an estimate from a Madison group right here, RTV Roofing, but as part of their business decision, they are no longer in the roofing business. They're still in business, they just don't do that aspect of it anymore. And so we need to go out for more quotes to get some ideas on what this will cost. This is a standing seam steel roof replacement. As best as Julie can tell by looking at records and talking to people, the roof may be at least 80 years old, somewhere in that neighborhood. What we are recommending is that we go to the taxpayers for $50,000. That would pay a portion of it. The one estimate we have is $75,000. Again, as I mentioned, we'll get other estimates. Julie has secured a grant from the Belvedere for $10,000, and the trustees, the library trustees, are willing to pay the difference. Does that sound about right, Julie?
Up to $15,000, they don't have more than $15,000 to take out of the trust fund without really draining a lot of money out of the trust. And that fund has got to last in perpetuity, so. Yeah, the only thing I could find as far as the age of the roof was the fact that it had been painted over 40 years ago, and you don't paint a new roof. So we're guessing 60 to 80, could be older, I don't know. It's very thin and very, very dull.
If you're like me and you've lived here most of your life and you've never looked up and looked at the roof of the library, I encourage you to do so. It's a challenging roof. It has a large cupola, I guess we'd call it, and it's very steep. Whoever does the work is going to have to get a lot of rental equipment to get there and do it right. I had a question asked today, is it leaking, as far as you know?
No.
Okay. And I think part of that strategy is, why don't we fix it before it begins
Well, it did
leaking?
leak. We had an ice dam several years ago, and we ended up with damage to the ceiling, damage to the woodwork of one of the original windows. And there's really no way to know exactly where it came in. It didn't get fixed, but we haven't had that combination of weather again, so it hasn't happened again.
So any other questions for Dawn or Julie while they're here.
Julia, are you looking to get that done as soon as possible, like this summer?
Well, one of the reasons that, I'd like to have it done before winter comes. One of the reasons is because Belvedere Preservation Trust gave us 10,000. I have talked to them. The grant states that you have to use the money within a year of receiving it. We received it last September. I called them and they said, look, you know, if you get close to September and you can't do it exactly, you know, on September 1st, then call us and we'll give you an extension. But the roof isn't getting any newer. And it's, you know, it's the one time I'll ever ask for a roof. Just, let's put it that way.
Guaranteed.
You give me a roof, I'll never ask for one again.
It's the one time we'll answer you.
Thank you, Julie.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? I passed out to the board, and I have copies if anyone would like them. I'll leave them up on the table there. As a kind of a history of some of the grant work that's been done at that library, and I think this is also important for you to share with members of the public, that since 2006, Julie has written and received $86,000 in grants. And that has all gone towards that building, which is a historical building on the National Registry of Historical Buildings. It's really an icon in our town. Windows, ceiling, insulation, foundation repair, and now this roof repair, all have been aided by the grant writing. So I thank Julie for the work that she's done. So.
Unfortunately, I mean, I've written many more grants, I just haven't been awarded any more money.
All right, last slide I wanted to share with you is what I call the middle rate impact. And I, you know, personally, my philosophy is this is where I start with budgeting. And this is something that I think is very important. It's very important to our taxpayers and for those who attend town meeting. I'm going to talk a little bit about the police budget while I'm on there, even though it's not specifically on this slide. Because I met with the sheriff and Pat Dolan, who is on our budget committee, but Patrick's also the finance director for the county. Somerset County anticipates an increase in their budget, same as everybody else, due to wages, an increase. They have a large contingent in the police union, also they have a large contingent in the corrections officers union. Those talks are heading to some increases. Patrick and the sheriff and I factored that into our Madison division budget, which in this budget you'll see has been increased by $15,000. The overall cost of what the sheriff is estimating it's going to take to run the sheriff's department in Madison is $515,000. The town, I'm recommending we raise from taxation about $455,000. Last year we raised $440,000. The sheriff does have a contingency fund of about $40,000. And this year I asked the school board to consider contributing $20,000 to the student or school resource officer that the town has. So at a recent school board meeting, they agreed to factor that into their budget. So that's kind of a overall where we are in policing. For many years, we've been getting money back from the county for money that we don't spend on policing, and part of that has been because we've been running with 3.5 deputies through the course of the year. This will be the first year, I believe, that we'll run pretty much the whole fiscal year with 4 deputies. So that will use up most of that budget. So the county has told me that they anticipate, we don't know what it is, their county will have their budget meetings over the next couple of months. The school district, they're starting their budget process. They will receive, just because of the town's valuation and whatnot, they'll receive an additional $300,000 in state aid to education. So that may offset any budget increases that the school board proposes. So once again, they may be able to come to the Madison taxpayer and say, we're reducing the amount that you pay in taxes, even though their overall budget may go up. Last couple of years, their budget's been a little bit over 10 million. So I have no idea, I don't even wanna venture a guess as to what, they are looking at. So, I wanna remind everybody, when it comes to the mill rate, last year, the Budget Advisory Committee and the Selectmen recommended to town meeting, and town meeting voters approved, taking $400,000 from undesignated funds to offset taxes. I'm saying right now, and I'm not even looking at Tammy because I know what she's thinking, we can't do that again this year. We just don't have the cash reserves to do that. I believe that we have some funds to come forward, but not $400,000. The TIF funds that we have, every year we've used less and less TIF money, and that's by design. I do not want the town to grow dependent on these TIF funds that offset certain parts of the budget. So last year it was 230, this year I'm recommending to drop that to 200,000. Everyone may or may not be aware that the homestead exemption goes up this year. That comes from the state. That actually helps us a little bit because not only are they raising the homestead exemption, they're giving more to the municipality to offset that loss. It's not 100%, but I think it goes up to 70 or 75%. What that will do to the average taxpayer that lives in their home is they're gonna see $100 come off their taxes automatically. So if the tax rate remains stable, the average homeowner that has a homestead will see a $100 reduction in their taxes this year. And they'll thank you for it, even though you and I have very little to do, right? So here's what I'm thinking. If the school stays flat and the county remains as flat as they can, it would take about $150,000 from undesignated fund balance and that 200 from TIF to keep the mill rates.